Hello and welcome, dear listeners, to another late-night tale on Shadow Storyteller. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe, give this video a like, and leave a comment if you enjoy bedtime stories that keep you wondering long after the lights are out. Your support helps me share more stories like this with you. Tonight's story begins with something that seems ordinary at first, a phone call. But as you'll soon discover, not every ring comes from someone we know, and not every voice is one we expect to hear. It was a damp Friday evening in early November 2022, when Emma Collins, a 34-year-old marketing consultant living in Bristol, England, sat curled up on her sofa with a cup of chamomile tea. Rain tapped gently against the window, and the yellow glow of the street lamp outside gave the whole living room a soft, quiet atmosphere. Emma had just finished a video call with her colleague, Mark, who was preparing a pitch for a client in London the following week. Her phone, lying face down on the coffee table, suddenly vibrated. The screen lit up with a number she didn't recognize, an American code, and more specifically from Texas. Emma frowned. She had no friends or family in Texas. For a moment, she considered letting it ring out, but something, curiosity, or maybe unease, made her reach for it. She hesitated before answering. "Hello." At first, there was silence. Then, a man's voice, low and slightly strained, came through. "Is this Emma?" Her breath caught. The accent was definitely American, and there was a kind of nervousness in his tone. She didn't recognize the voice, yet the way he spoke her name felt strangely personal, as if he knew her. "This is Emma," she replied cautiously. "Who's calling?" There was a pause, followed by the sound of someone taking a shaky breath. "My name is Daniel Hayes. I don't know how to explain this, but I think we need to talk. It's about something that happened in Austin, back in 1996. Emma's heart skipped. She was only 8 years old in 1996. She had never even been to the United States. She sat forward on the sofa, gripping the phone tighter. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming steadily against the glass, as if echoing her rising tension. "I think you've got the wrong number," she said, trying to steady her voice. But Daniel was quick to answer. "No, I've tried this call too many times for it to be a mistake. You might not remember, but your name was given to me, and you're the only person left who can help me figure this out." Emma swallowed hard. A chill ran through her despite the warmth of her blanket. She wanted to hang up, to dismiss this as some bizarre scam. But there was a quiver in Daniel's voice that didn't sound like a scammer. It sounded like desperation. "What exactly do you think I can help you with?" she asked, her tone firm, though her pulse raced. There was another pause. Then Daniel spoke slowly, almost as though choosing each word with care. "I believe you might know something about my sister. Her name was Sarah. She disappeared that summer, and I think you were there." Emma froze. The name Sarah stirred something faint and unsettling at the back of her mind, like an old memory half buried beneath years of dust. But it didn't make sense. She had never been to Texas, never met anyone named Sarah from there. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the room for a split second before fading back into shadows. Emma realized she was holding her breath. She finally spoke, her voice quieter now. "I don't understand. I was a child then. I've never even been to America." Daniel's reply came swiftly, filled with urgency. "I know how it sounds, Emma, but please don't hang up. You're the only lead I have left. Just hear me out." Emma leaned back, staring at the rain running down her window, torn between reason and the strange pull of the call. Part of her wanted to demand answers immediately. Another part feared what might come if she let him go on. Yet something inside her, something she couldn't explain, told her this conversation was about to unravel more than just a wrong number. Emma pressed the phone closer to her ear, her knuckles whitening against the smooth glass surface. She could hear faint static from Daniel's end, the kind that reminded her of old radio transmissions, as if the distance between Bristol and Texas stretched not just across miles, but through some unseen divide. The rain outside had become steadier, forming rivulets against the glass, blurring the lights of passing cars into long streaks of yellow and red. "Daniel," she began carefully, "I really don't know how I could possibly be connected to this. I've never been to Austin. I've never even left Europe when I was a child." There was a muffled sound on the other end, like Daniel was pacing. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost apologetic. "I know it sounds impossible. I've had the same thoughts for years. But your name, it came up in my sister's diary. The last entry she wrote before she vanished. She wrote your name. Emma Collins." Emma's lips parted, but no words came. She sank deeper into the sofa, the warm blankets suddenly feeling like a weight. A childhood memory stirred faintly in her mind. Something about a letter, written in childish scrawl, that her mother once found in an old box. A letter with an American postmark, but that had been so many years ago, and she had never thought about it since. "My sister disappeared on the 14th of June, 1996, Daniel continued, his tone low, deliberate. "She was 12 years old. The police said she was most likely abducted. We searched for months, for years, and then we found her diary in the attic of my parents' home when they passed away. That's when I saw your name. Sarah wrote, 'Tomorrow I'll meet Emma Collins.' There was no one else it could have been." Emma's pulse quickened. She had been 8 in 1996. She was still in primary school in Bristol, walking home in the drizzle, clutching her lunchbox with cartoon stickers peeling from its sides. Yet the name, written in a diary thousands of miles away, how could that be explained? "Are you sure it was my name?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her effort to stay calm. "Yes," Daniel said firmly. The handwriting was hers. She was so precise with names. It wasn't a mistake. That's why I've been searching. I tried to track every Emma Collins born around your age. Most of them I ruled out. But you matched the details. You fit the timeline." Emma's thoughts spiraled. She pressed her free hand to her forehead. Was this man delusional? Or was there some strange truth buried in what he was saying? "Look," she said, attempting to steady her tone. "I was in Bristol that whole year. I couldn't have possibly met your sister." On the line, Daniel let out a sigh that sounded weary, burdened with years of unanswered questions. "Maybe you don't remember. Maybe you were too young. But the diary doesn't lie. You were there, somehow. And I need to know why." The room felt smaller, as if the shadows in the corners had crept closer. Emma stood abruptly, pacing to the window, pulling the curtain aside. Outside, the street was empty, the rain hammering the pavement, glistening under the streetlight. She felt the urge to hang up, to push this strangeness out of her life. But her curiosity anchored her in place. "What do you want from me?" she asked quietly. There was a pause before Daniel answered. "I want to know what happened to Sarah, and I think you might hold the key. even if you don't realize it yet. Please, let me tell you what I know. And then, if you still think I'm crazy, you can hang up. Emma hesitated. The sensible thing would be to end the call, to block the number, to chalk it up to a stranger lost in grief. But the name, written in a diary in Texas decades ago, gnawed at her. "All right," she whispered. "Go on." Daniel's voice steadied, though it carried the weight of years. That summer, we lived on the outskirts of Austin, near Barton Creek. It was hot, unbearably hot. Sarah used to ride her bike to the little library on Oak Hill Road. She was quiet, always scribbling notes in her diary. On June 13th, she wrote about meeting someone new. She didn't describe them much, just a name. "Yours." The next day, she left for the library and never came back. Emma listened, her breath shallow. She closed her eyes, trying to imagine a 12-year-old girl pedaling down a Texas road, the sun blazing above, diary tucked in her bag. Daniel continued. The police searched everywhere. They questioned everyone, but no one had seen her that day. It was as if she disappeared into thin air. And all we had was that diary entry, her last words. "For years I thought it meant nothing, until I found you." Emma rubbed her temples. But how could I be there? I was a child in England. I had no family in the States. My parents never traveled there. There's no way. Daniel's tone grew firmer. Maybe it's not about physically being there. Maybe there's something else. Something you've forgotten, or something that connects you in a way you don't understand yet. A chill ran down Emma's spine. She recalled the old letter again, the one with the American postmark. She had dismissed it as a mistake, a wrong address. But what if it wasn't? Do you still have the diary?" she asked. "Yes," Daniel said. "I've kept it all these years. If you want, I can send you a copy of the page. Maybe seeing it will jog your memory." Emma bit her lip, considering. Receiving something like that would make this all too real. Yet part of her needed to see it, to confirm whether her name was truly there in the handwriting of a missing girl. "All right," she said softly. "Send it." There was a faint rustling on the other end as Daniel scribbled something down. "Give me your email. I'll scan it tonight." Emma hesitated before giving him an address she rarely used, the one she reserved for newsletters and old logins. "Thank you," Daniel said, relief in his voice. "I know this is strange, but I swear, Emma, there's a reason our lives are connected. We just need to find out what it is." When the call finally ended, Emma lowered the phone slowly onto the coffee table. The silence of her flat pressed in around her. She stood there, staring at the rain-streaked window, heart racing. She tried to dismiss it, to tell herself it was nonsense. Yet as she prepared for bed that night, a memory slipped unbidden into her mind. The faint image of a girl's face, framed by sunlight, smiling at her as though they had once shared a secret. Emma jolted upright, clutching her pillow. She didn't know this girl. She couldn't have. And yet the image felt real. The next morning, Emma's inbox pinged with a new message. The subject line read, "Sarah's diary." Her hand hovered over the mouse, her stomach tight with unease. She clicked. The email contained a single scan page, yellowed with age. At the top, in neat handwriting, it read, June 13th, 1996. Beneath it, the words leapt out at her. "Tomorrow I'll meet Emma Collins. She says she knows things. I think she might be my friend." Emma stared at the screen, her tea cooling on the desk beside her. Her name was there, written clearly in the looping script of a 12-year-old girl she had never met. Her breath caught, because deep down, she knew one thing for certain now. Somewhere, somehow, she had met Sarah, and the mystery was only beginning to unfold. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she scrolled back and forth over the image on her laptop screen. The handwriting was youthful, yet steady, every letter carefully formed, as though Sarah had taken great care in recording her thoughts. The words felt heavy, as if they carried something more than a child's simple diary entry. Tomorrow I'll meet Emma Collins. She says she knows things. I think she might be my friend. Emma read the sentence over and over until the letters blurred. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling, trying to rationalize. It could be a coincidence, she told herself. There were many people named Emma Collins, especially in English-speaking countries. Perhaps Sarah had meant someone else entirely. Yet deep down, that explanation did not sit well. Something in her bones, in the restless way her thoughts twisted and turned, told her this was not random. The next days passed with a strange unease. At work, she found herself distracted during meetings, her eyes darting to her phone each time it buzzed. At night, she would wake from half-dreams of a sunlit path, of a girl with long hair pedaling a bicycle down a dusty road, her laughter fading into silence. By the third day, Daniel called again. "Did you see the diary page?" he asked without preamble. "Yes," Emma said softly, her voice betraying the weight she carried. "I saw it." And his tone carried hope, but also fear, as if bracing for her dismissal. Emma hesitated. "It's my name, but I still don't understand how. I wasn't there. I've never even been to Texas." On the other end, Daniel exhaled heavily. "I knew you'd say that. But Emma, listen. Sometimes memories aren't clear. Sometimes they get buried. Trauma, distance, or things we can't explain. I've read enough to know the mind can hide more than it reveals." Emma walked to the window as they spoke, looking out at the gray drizzle of Bristol. The world outside seemed so ordinary. People with umbrellas rushing along the pavement, buses pulling up with squealing brakes. Yet inside her, nothing felt ordinary anymore. "What are you suggesting?" she asked cautiously. "I'm suggesting," Daniel replied, "that you try to remember. Maybe there's something from your childhood you've forgotten. A trip, a visitor, something unusual. Anything." Emma closed her eyes. Memories flickered. Birthday parties with balloons and cake, her mother braiding her hair before school, the smell of rain on hot tarmac. Nothing stood out. Nothing that linked her to a missing girl in Texas. But then, faintly, she recalled the letter. The one with the American postmark. "I remember once," she began slowly. "When I was very young, my mother received a letter for me. I must have been 8 or 9. It was strange, because I never got letters. The envelope had American stamps on it. She never told me much about it, only that it was probably a mistake. But I remember holding it. It felt important." Daniel's voice sharpened with interest. "Do you still have it?" "I don't know," Emma admitted. "It was decades ago. My parents kept old boxes in the attic. Maybe it's still there." "Emma, you need to find it," Daniel said urgently. "That letter might be the key. It could explain why Sarah knew your name." That night, Emma climbed into the dusty attic of her parents' house, where her mother still lived. Boxes were stacked haphazardly, some labeled with fading marker. Christmas decorations, school books, photographs. She pulled one down, coughing as dust rose into the dim light. Hours passed as she rummaged through forgotten fragments of her childhood. Old dolls, drawings, postcards. Finally, tucked between exercise books, she found a yellowed envelope. The paper was brittle, the ink faded. Her heart pounded as she turned it over and saw the faint but unmistakable outline of American stamps. Her fingers shook as she slid the letter out. The handwriting was clumsy, childlike. Dear Emma, my name is Sarah. I don't know if you believe me, but I think we're supposed to be friends. I saw your name in a dream, and I know you can help me. Tomorrow I'm going to the library, and maybe we'll meet. Sarah! Emma stared at the letter for a long time, her mind a storm of disbelief and recognition. The letter was real. The diary was real. Somehow, across an ocean, two little girls had been connected. She snapped a photo and sent it to Daniel immediately. Within minutes, her phone buzzed with his call. Emma, he said breathlessly, this changes everything. She wrote to you. She really did. You were the one she meant. But how? Emma asked, her voice rising. How could she write to me? She didn't know my address. I didn't know hers. How is any of this possible? Daniel was silent for a moment. Then he said quietly, I don't know, but I think we need to find out together. Over the next weeks, their conversations grew longer. Daniel told her about Austin in the 90s. The heat, the suburban streets, the nights when cicadas filled the air with their endless song. He described Sarah in detail. Her love for books, her curiosity, her habit of scribbling in margins. Each story painted a clearer picture of a girl Emma felt she had somehow always known, though she couldn't explain why. At the same time, Emma began to dig into her own past. She visited her mother, asking careful questions. At first, her mother brushed them aside, insisting there had never been a trip, never been American visitors. But when Emma showed her the letter, her mother's expression shifted. I told you to forget about that, her mother whispered, her face pale. It was strange. We received it out of nowhere. I thought it was just a child's mistake. I didn't want you frightened, but why was it addressed to me? Emma pressed. Her mother shook her head, eyes distant. I don't know. I truly don't. That night, Emma dreamt vividly. She was standing in a sunlit library with tall windows, the air heavy with dust and the faint scent of paper. A girl with long brown hair approached her, holding out a book. When Emma reached for it, the girl whispered, You were supposed to help me. She woke with a gasp, her sheets tangled around her, heart pounding. The following morning, she called Daniel. I think I saw her, Emma said, her voice shaking. In a dream. She spoke to me. Daniel was silent for a long time. Finally, he said, Emma, I think you and Sarah shared something we can't explain. And maybe she's still trying to reach you. Emma looked out the window, the winter sky pale and empty. She felt both fear and a strange sense of duty. Then what do we do? She asked. Daniel's answer came slowly, but with determination. You come here, to Texas. We need to stand where she stood. We need to trace her steps together. Emma gripped the phone tightly. The idea of flying across the ocean to meet a man she'd never seen, to chase the shadow of a girl long missing, was terrifying. And yet, deep down, she knew it was inevitable. Because the mystery was no longer just about Sarah. It was about Emma too, and she could not turn away. Emma booked the ticket 3 weeks later. It had taken days of restless nights, of endless debates with herself, of pacing around her flat with her phone in hand, staring at Daniel's messages. Each time she hesitated, the image of Sarah's diary page rose in her mind, the looping letters spelling out her own name. There was no escaping it. She needed to go. The morning she left, Bristol was cloaked in mist, the streets damp with last night's drizzle. Her mother had called her twice that week, urging her to reconsider, warning her not to chase ghosts. But Emma could not ignore the pull. At the airport, as she waited by the boarding gate, she clutched her small suitcase with both hands and stared out at the runway lights, blinking faintly against the dawn sky. The flight to Dallas was long, nearly 10 hours. Emma barely slept. She dozed in fragments, dreams blending into memories. She saw Sarah's face again, clearer this time. A smile, the way she tilted her head as if listening closely. When Emma opened her eyes, the hum of the engines filled the cabin, and she found herself gripping the armrest, heart pounding as though she had just lived a memory instead of a dream. Daniel was waiting at the airport. He was taller than she expected, with tired eyes and a voice that carried both weariness and warmth. He held a small sign with her name, though when their eyes met, they didn't need words. For a moment, both simply stood there, studying one another as though trying to confirm they were real. "Emma?" he asked softly. She nodded. "Daniel." The drive from Dallas to Austin stretched on under a wide Texan sky. The landscape unfolded in endless plains, dotted with trees and low buildings. Emma sat quietly in the passenger seat, staring out at the horizon. She felt small, as if the vastness of this place could swallow her whole. Daniel broke the silence. "I want to take you first to the library. It's where she was last seen." Emma's throat tightened. "The one on Oak Hill Road?" "Yes," he said, glancing at her in surprise. "How did you know that?" She hesitated. "I saw it. In a dream. Tall windows, dust in the air." Daniel gripped the steering wheel more firmly. "That's it. That's the one." They reached Austin by evening. The city buzzed with life. Restaurants spilling out music and laughter, neon signs flickering against the twilight. But their journey took them further out, into quieter streets where suburban houses lined the roads. Finally, they stopped in front of a modest brick building with faded paint and darkened windows. "This is it," Daniel murmured. Emma stepped out of the car. The air was warm, carrying the scent of dry earth. She stared at the library, her chest tightening with an inexplicable recognition. As she approached, her footsteps slowed. She felt as though she had walked this path before, though she knew she had never set foot in Texas until this day. Inside, the library smelled of old paper and wood polish. Dust motes floated in the air, caught in the weak light from the tall windows. Emma's gaze swept over the rows of shelves, the worn carpet, the heavy oak tables. Her hand brushed against one of the chairs, and suddenly a wave of déjà vu crashed over her. She closed her eyes. A vision unfolded, Sarah, sitting at that very table, scribbling in her diary. Emma saw herself, impossibly younger, standing by the shelves, watching. She could hear Sarah's voice. "Tomorrow I'll meet Emma Collins. She says she knows things." Emma gasped, pulling her hand back as though burned. Daniel rushed to her side. "What happened?" "I saw her," Emma whispered. "Here." She was here. "And I was too." Daniel stared at her, searching her face. "You're remembering." Emma shook her head, struggling to breathe evenly. "But how? How could I have been here when I was a child? It makes no sense. They left the library in silence, the weight of unanswered questions heavy between them. That night, Daniel offered her the guest room in his small house on the outskirts of Austin. Emma lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above her. Each creak of the house made her heart jump. Near midnight, she heard footsteps in the hallway. She sat up, holding her breath. The footsteps paused outside her door. She expected a knock, but none came. Instead, a faint whisper slipped through the crack, so soft she almost doubted it. "Help me!" Emma froze. Her chest tightened painfully. She wanted to call out, but her voice caught in her throat. She forced herself to stand, open the door. But the hallway was empty, dark except for a faint glow from the kitchen at the far end. The next morning, she told Daniel. His face went pale. "That's what she used to say," he murmured. "Before she disappeared, she always said someone was asking her for help." Days passed as they retraced Sarah's last movements. They visited the path she had biked down, the creek where children used to play, the street where a neighbor once swore they had seen her. Everywhere they went, Emma felt strange flashes, sounds, scents, pieces of memory that were not hers, yet lived inside her like echoes. One evening, they returned to Daniel's house exhausted. Emma sat on the porch, watching the sun bleed into the horizon, painting the sky orange and purple. Daniel joined her, holding 2 glasses of water. "Do you think she's still alive?" Emma asked quietly. Daniel stared at the fading light. "I used to believe she was. I searched for years, followed every lead. But now, I don't know. Maybe she's gone. Maybe all that's left is whatever ties her to you." Emma shivered. "Why me?" "That's what we have to find out," Daniel replied. That night, Emma dreamed again. She was standing in the library, but this time Sarah was closer. Her eyes were wide, pleading. She reached out, gripping Emma's hands tightly. "You're supposed to help me," Sarah said. "You promised." Emma woke with tears on her cheeks. The following day, Daniel suggested they visit his parents' old house. It had been empty for years, but perhaps something remained, something they had overlooked. The house stood at the edge of town, weathered and quiet, its paint peeling from years of neglect. Inside, dust coated the furniture, and the air smelled of old wood. Emma wandered through the rooms, her footsteps echoing faintly. She paused in Sarah's old bedroom. The walls were pale blue, faded posters still clinging stubbornly. A small desk stood in the corner, its surface scratched and worn. Emma sat at the desk, running her fingers across the wood. Suddenly, her hand caught on a loose board. She pried it open and found a small, folded note hidden beneath. Her pulse raced as she unfolded it. The handwriting was Sarah's. It read, "If something happens to me, Emma will know. She is the only one I can trust." Emma's breath came in shallow gasps. She called out for Daniel, her voice shaking. When he read the note, his hands trembled. "She knew," he whispered. "She knew you were important. Somehow she knew." Emma stared at the note, her heart heavy with both fear and responsibility. She had come to Texas searching for answers, but now she felt herself caught in something far larger than she had imagined. The past was not finished with her, and Sarah's voice, carried through dreams and memories, would not let her go. The next morning in London was gray, heavy with drizzle, the kind that blurred the outlines of buildings and left pavements shining like mirrors. Thomas woke early, though he had barely slept, and the sound of rain against his window only deepened the unease that had settled in him since the call. He made coffee in silence, the kitchen dim except for the faint orange glow of the toaster warming bread. He didn't really want to eat. The phone lay on the table. He stared at it, as if expecting it to vibrate again. He checked the screen more than once, but there were no new messages, no missed calls. Just that single log entry from Texas, a number with no name attached. At 9 o'clock, he decided he couldn't sit idle. He walked to his small study, switched on his computer, and began searching. The number, typed into a search bar, yielded little at first. No official listing, no company, no personal profile. But after scrolling deeper into obscure forums and directories, he found fragments. One thread from a year ago mentioned the same number, describing a call received late at night. A woman's voice whispering something the poster couldn't make out, followed by silence. Another forum post mentioned that the number was linked to Waco, Texas. That name hit Thomas harder than he expected. He had been to Waco once, years ago, during a long road trip across America with his university friend, Daniel Harris. They had been 23, restless, hungry for experiences. Their rented car packed with maps, snacks, and cassette tapes that became the soundtrack of their summer. Daniel had been the wild one, charismatic, always pushing them toward detours. It was Daniel who had insisted they stop in Waco, just for a night, because he had read something about the town's strange history. Thomas leaned back in his chair, the hum of his computer filling the silence, and the memory sharpened. That night in Waco, they had stumbled upon a small bar on the edge of town. Neon lights flickered in the windows, and locals eyed them curiously when they walked in. They had played pool, drank cheap beer, and Daniel had ended up talking to an older man who claimed to know secrets about land disputes and families that carried grudges for decades. Thomas remembered how Daniel laughed it off, while Thomas himself had felt uneasy. The rain outside in London tapped harder against the glass. Thomas rubbed his temples. Daniel had stayed in Texas after that trip. He had fallen in love with a woman named Rebecca and decided not to return to England. They wrote letters for a while, then emails, but eventually, like so many friendships, the connection thinned until it was gone. Thomas hadn't heard from him in nearly 15 years. He stood abruptly, almost knocking over his coffee. The thought came fast, heavy, and undeniable. What if the call had something to do with Daniel? The rest of the day was slow torture. Thomas went to his job at the publishing office near Holborn, but he could not focus on manuscripts. Colleagues asked if he was all right. He smiled, nodded, said he hadn't slept well, but his mind kept circling back to the call, to Waco, to Daniel. That night, precisely at 11:30, the phone rang again. The same number. Thomas froze. His hand hovered above the phone for what felt like an eternity. He answered, "Hello." His voice cracked slightly. Static filled the line, but beneath it, a faint rhythm like breath. Then a voice, trembling female. "Thomas, don't trust anyone from here. Not even me." His heart pounded so loudly, he almost didn't hear the words. "Who is this?" he demanded. "Why are you calling me?" But the voice didn't answer his question. Instead, she whispered, "It started years ago. You and Daniel. You left something unfinished." Then silence. The call ended. Thomas stood in the dark kitchen, the phone still pressed to his ear. His reflection caught faintly in the window pane. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the night eerily still. He lowered the phone slowly. every nerve in his body tight with confusion and dread. For the next hour he paced the flat. The words replayed again and again. Don't trust anyone from here. Not even me. He didn't know who the woman was, or how she knew his name, or why she mentioned Daniel. But one thing was certain. This was no prank. It was personal. He returned to his study and dug out an old shoebox from the bottom of his wardrobe. Inside were mementos from his younger days. Faded photographs, letters, postcards. He sifted through until he found one particular photo. It showed him and Daniel standing outside that bar in Waco, both grinning, arms slung over each other's shoulders. On the back, in Daniel's handwriting, were the words, "We'll never forget this night." Thomas stared at the photo for a long time, his pulse steadying but his mind racing. Whatever had been left unfinished, as the woman said, it was tied to that night. And if Daniel was involved, Thomas had no choice but to go back. The decision felt absurd, reckless even. But by the time the first hint of dawn touched the London sky, Thomas had booked a flight to Texas. Days later, after hours of restless travel, he found himself stepping out into the sweltering heat of Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. The air smelled different here, heavy with dust and gasoline, a stark contrast to the damp chill of London. He rented a car and began the 2-hour drive south toward Waco, the highway stretching endlessly under a burning sun. As he drove, old memories surfaced. He recalled how Daniel had spoken of wanting to settle down, of feeling strangely at home in Texas. He remembered Rebecca, her long dark hair, the quiet strength in her eyes. He had only met her once briefly, but he could still picture her smile. He wondered now if she was still alive, if she was connected to the mysterious calls. Waco had changed in 15 years. Chain restaurants lined the roads, new buildings stood where empty lots had been. Yet the air of tension he had felt back then seemed unchanged. Thomas checked into a small motel on the edge of town, the kind with flickering neon signs and humming air conditioners that rattled in the walls. That night, as he lay on the creaky bed, his phone buzzed. He sat up instantly. Another message, same number. This time it wasn't a call but a text. The words chilled him. "You shouldn't have come back." He's watching. Thomas's fingers trembled as he typed back. "Who? What do you want from me?" No reply came. The silence was worse than the words. Sleep was impossible. He stared at the ceiling, listening to the drone of the air conditioner, and wondered what he had stepped into. The following morning, determined to seek answers, he began searching for Daniel. He drove through neighborhoods, asked at local cafes, checked online directories. Eventually, at a diner on the outskirts of town, a waitress told him she had heard of a man named Daniel Harris who lived on the west side, in a small house near the river. The sun was high when Thomas reached the place. The house looked worn but cared for, with a rusting truck parked out front and wind chimes clinking faintly in the hot breeze. He hesitated before knocking, every nerve alive with both dread and hope. The door opened slowly, and there, older but unmistakable, stood Daniel. His face carried the lines of time, his hair streaked with gray, but his eyes were the same, bright, sharp, alive. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Daniel said quietly, "Thomas, you shouldn't be here." The words were not of joy or reunion, but of warning. And in that instant, Thomas knew the nightmare was only beginning. The silence between them stretched like a taut wire. Thomas stood on the porch, the heat pressing down on his shoulders, while Daniel remained in the doorway, his hands still gripping the frame as if holding the world at bay. At last, Thomas spoke. "I had to come. You know why." Daniel's jaw tightened. His gaze flicked toward the street, scanning for unseen eyes, before settling back on his old friend. "No, you don't know why. You only think you do, but you've stepped into something you should have left buried." Despite the warning, Thomas took a step forward. The wooden boards creaked beneath his weight. "I got the calls, Daniel. Someone knew my name. They mentioned you. They said we left something unfinished." For the first time, a flicker of recognition passed over Daniel's face. He looked older in that moment, not just in years but in burdens carried too long. With a slow breath, he pushed the door wider. "Come inside." Quickly. The living room was dim, the curtains drawn though the Texas sun blazed outside. A faint smell of dust and old would fill the air. On the walls hung photographs. Rebecca's face appeared in many of them, smiling beside Daniel, sometimes with a child. Thomas paused. "You have a family." Daniel nodded, his expression guarded. "Rebecca passed 5 years ago. Car accident. Our son, Michael, is at university now. He doesn't come home often." The words carried sorrow, but also relief, as if distance kept Michael safe. They sat across from each other at a scarred wooden table. The fan overhead spun lazily, stirring the heat but not dispelling it. "Tell me everything," Thomas urged. Daniel leaned back, his fingers drumming against the table. "That night in Waco, when we were 23. Do you remember the man at the bar?" Thomas's heart jumped. The memory had haunted him for years. The older man. He said strange things. Land disputes, families' grudges. Daniel nodded. His name was Elias Carter. What we didn't know was that he wasn't just drunk talk. He was part of something bigger. A family feud that has lasted generations. He believed outsiders like us could play a role, though we never understood why. Thomas frowned. "But we left the next morning. We never did anything." "That's what you believe," Daniel said softly. "But Elias claimed we carried a secret with us. Something we saw, something we didn't even realize mattered. He called it unfinished business." The phrase echoed the caller's words. Thomas leaned forward, his pulse quickening. "The calls? Who are they from?" Daniel's face hardened. "I don't know, but I've had them too for years. Sometimes a woman, sometimes silence. Always from that number. They know things about me no one else should. And every time, they say the same thing. Don't trust anyone." Thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, though the sky outside remained bright. The weight of the words pressed on both men. "Why me?" Thomas asked. "I haven't been here in 15 years. "Because you were there that night," Daniel replied. "Because you heard Elias, just like I did. And because," he hesitated, his eyes dropping to the table, "because Rebecca once told me something before she died. She said a woman had come to see her, claiming to know me, claiming I was part of a story bigger than myself. And she mentioned your name." The room seemed to shrink around them. Before Thomas could ask more, the sound of tires crunching gravel echoed outside. Daniel stiffened, rose quickly, and pulled the curtain aside just enough to peer through. A black pickup truck idled near the end of the drive. 2 men sat inside, watching the house. "They've been circling for weeks," Daniel muttered. "I don't know who they are, but they don't hide their interest. If they see you here, things will get worse." The air thickened with dread. Thomas's throat was dry. "What do we do?" Daniel turned, his expression sharp now, urgency replacing sorrow. "We leave. Tonight. Before they decide to act. There's someone who might have answers. Someone Elias mentioned all those years ago. Her name is Marlene. She lives near the Brazos River, out past the old cotton fields. But finding her won't be easy." As evening fell, they packed quickly. Daniel stuffed a few clothes into a worn duffel bag, along with old letters tied in string. Thomas kept checking his phone, half hoping, half dreading another message. The silence of the device was almost worse than the ringing. They slipped out the back door under cover of dusk, moving across overgrown grass to Daniel's truck. The cicadas screamed in the trees, their song masking the crunch of their footsteps. As they drove away, headlights from the black pickup flared to life behind them, then fell into steady pursuit. The road wound through the outskirts of Waco, past gas stations glowing in the dark, past fields stretching flat under the rising moon. Thomas's grip tightened on the seat as he glanced back. The truck stayed 2 car lengths behind, neither closing nor falling away. Daniel's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "They won't make a move yet. Not here. But once we're out in the open country." He let the sentence trail off. For miles the chase continued. Then Daniel veered suddenly onto a dirt road, dust pluming behind them, branches clawing at the truck's sides. The headlights followed, bouncing in the rear view. "Hold on," Daniel muttered, and pressed the accelerator. The engine roared, gravel spraying as they tore down the narrowing track. Trees closed in, shadows swallowing the road. Ahead, faint lights flickered. An old farmhouse, isolated, standing against the night. Daniel skidded to a stop in front of the sagging porch. The headlights behind them cut off, plunging the world into darkness. "Go," Daniel hissed, shoving open his door. "Inside." They ran across the uneven ground, up the porch steps, and pounded on the door. After a tense pause, it creaked open. A woman stood there tall, with silver hair braided down her back, eyes sharp as flint despite her age. Her voice was calm, almost expectant. "You took your time." Daniel swallowed. "Marlene." She stepped aside, her gaze flicking to Thomas with unsettling intensity. "So this is the other one." The door closed behind them with a final, echoing click, shutting out the night and whatever watched from the darkness. Inside, the house smelled of herbs and old wood. Books lined the shelves, photographs and trinkets scattered like pieces of lives long gone. Marlene gestured for them to sit at a heavy oak table. A single oil lamp flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. "You've both been running from this for years," she said, her voice low, deliberate. "But the past does not let go so easily. Elias was right. You saw something that night, something you've both forgotten, or chosen to forget. But the people chasing you haven't forgotten, and they will not stop." Thomas's mouth was dry. "What did we see? What was it?" Marlene's eyes narrowed, studying him as though weighing his very soul. "That's the question, isn't it? And the answer may cost you more than you are willing to give." The wind outside rose, rattling the windows. Shadows swayed along the walls, and in the tense silence, Thomas realized the journey he had begun with a simple phone call was only now truly beginning. The room seemed to grow smaller as Marlene's words lingered in the air. The lamp flame flickered, shadows stretching across the walls like silent witnesses. Thomas felt his chest tighten. The woman before him was no stranger to secrets. Her eyes were sharp, steady, the eyes of someone who had carried knowledge for too long. Daniel leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. You've known about this from the start. Elias mentioned you years ago. Why wait until now to show yourself? Marlene folded her hands neatly, the silver of her rings catching the dim light. Because you were not ready to hear it. Elias was reckless. He believed too much in fate, in outsiders. He thought you too were chosen. But fate does not move in straight lines. It twists, it waits, and it tests. Thomas cleared his throat, his voice low. I don't understand. What exactly did we see? What was unfinished? Marlene's gaze shifted from Thomas to Daniel, then back again. That night, at the bar, while you were laughing, while you thought you were just passing through, there was a meeting in the back room. You may not have realized, but your eyes fell upon faces you should not have seen. Men tied to old feuds. Men who still fight over land that carries blood and memory. You didn't understand the weight of it then, but they knew. Outsiders with sharp eyes are dangerous. Thomas felt the memories stirring, faint but undeniable. He remembered laughter, the smell of beer and tobacco, the clack of pool balls. And he remembered a door swinging open, just for a second, revealing a room filled with smoke and low voices. A man with a scar across his cheek had glanced their way. The image had buried itself in the dust of memory, but now it surfaced with chilling clarity. Yes, Thomas whispered. I saw them, just for a moment. But why would they still care after all these years? Because one of those men disappeared the very next morning, Marlene said. And some believe outsiders were involved. That disappearance became a wound that never healed. You were tied to it, whether you knew it or not. And those who lost someone, they do not forget. The house creaked as the wind pressed against it, and somewhere outside, an owl called into the night. Daniel rubbed his face with both hands. So the calls, the threats, the men in the truck, they're all connected to this? To something we barely remember? Marlene nodded slowly. They don't want the truth, Daniel. They want silence. They want to erase loose ends. And you. Her eyes fixed on Thomas. You made the mistake of answering. The weight of her words sank deep. Thomas felt cold sweat gather at the base of his neck. Then what do we do? He asked, his voice trembling despite his attempt to steady it. Marlene rose, her long braids swaying against her back as she moved toward a cupboard. She retrieved a small wooden box, old and weathered. Setting it on the table, she opened it to reveal letters, photographs, and a tarnished silver key. This belonged to Elias, she said. Before he died, he left it in my care. He believed you would return one day, that both of you would need to face what was left undone. Daniel's eyes widened. Elias is dead? Marlene's tone was matter of fact. Nearly 10 years now. Shot in the chest, out by the river. They called it a hunting accident. We knew better. Thomas stared at the contents of the box. Among the photographs was one that made his breath catch. It showed the bar in Waco, the same one from that night. Outside the bar stood Elias, the man with the scar, and two others. And in the background, blurry but unmistakable, were Thomas and Daniel. They knew we were there, Thomas said quietly. Yes, Marlene confirmed. And now, after all this time, they've decided to remind you. Daniel clenched his fists. I can't keep running. Not anymore. Marlene looked at him with a mix of sympathy and resolve. Then you must choose. Confront the past, or let it consume you in silence. The night stretched long. They pored over Elias's letters, written in a shaky hand, filled with cryptic warnings. One letter mentioned a name: Samuel Carter, younger brother of the scarred man, now said to control much of the land disputes around Waco. Another note referenced a ledger, hidden somewhere along the Brazos River, said to contain records that could expose decades of corruption. By the time the oil lamp guttered low, Thomas felt the weight of exhaustion pressing on him. But his mind refused rest. He lay awake on a narrow cot Marlene had prepared, listening to the distant hum of insects and the faint creak of the old farmhouse. Every sound outside made him flinch, certain that headlights would appear again. At dawn, Marlene woke them with black coffee and a solemn expression. "They will come," she said simply. "Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. If you wish to stop running, the ledger is your path." Samuel Carter fears it, for within its pages lies the truth about what happened to his brother. Find it, and perhaps you will find peace. The day grew hot quickly. They drove west, the air thick with dust, the sky a merciless blue. Daniel navigated with old instincts, while Thomas studied the faded maps Marlene had given them. The river shimmered in the distance, winding through fields of tall grass. But as they neared the site Elias had marked, Thomas felt a chill crawl up his spine. A figure stood by the riverbank, as though waiting. When they drew closer, the figure turned. It was a woman, tall, with dark hair streaked with gray. Her eyes were tired, haunted. "I was told you'd come," she said. Daniel's voice was hoarse. "Rebecca?" Thomas's blood ran cold. Rebecca had been dead for 5 years. He had seen the photographs in Daniel's home, had heard the sorrow in his voice. And yet, here she stood, alive, breathing, staring at them with eyes full of unspoken stories. The river whispered against the stones. The air was heavy with silence, as if the world itself held its breath. Thomas couldn't move. He couldn't even form words. All he could do was stare at the impossible. Rebecca's voice trembled, but it carried weight. "They lied to you, Daniel. They lied to both of us. And now the truth will cost more than you can imagine." The ground beneath Thomas seemed to shift. What he thought he knew about Daniel, about the calls, about the past, was unraveling faster than he could grasp. Rebecca stepped closer, her eyes locked on Thomas. The calls weren't warnings. They were invitations. The cicadas screamed louder. The river glimmered with cruel brightness. And Thomas realized the story he thought had begun with a single phone call was spiraling into something far older, far darker, and far more dangerous than he could ever have prepared for. The air along the Brazos River hung heavy with heat and disbelief. The cicadas screamed from the trees. The sun blazed down. Yet Thomas felt a coldness in his chest that no warmth could chase away. Rebecca stood there, impossibly alive. Her shadow stretched long on the riverbank. Daniel's lips parted, but no words came. His eyes searched hers as if to confirm she was real. His hands trembled on the steering wheel until finally he forced himself out of the truck. Gravel crunched under his boots as he staggered toward her. "You're supposed to be dead," he whispered, his voice breaking. Rebecca's expression softened, but sorrow weighed down every line of her face. "That's what they wanted you to believe. And for 5 years, it kept you safe. If you had known the truth, they would have destroyed you." Thomas climbed out slowly, his legs heavy as stone. He had never been close to Rebecca, but he remembered her kindness, her laugh, the warmth she carried that balanced Daniel's recklessness. Now she looked older, haunted, like someone who had spent years hiding in shadows. "Who lied?" Thomas asked, his voice rough. "Who made you disappear?" Rebecca's gaze flicked to him. "The Carters. Samuel most of all. I stumbled on something I was never meant to see. Something Elias had tried to protect. When I realized the ledger existed, I became a threat. The accident was staged. A burned-out car, a body no one could identify, a funeral with a closed casket. And you believed it because you were meant to." Daniel swayed as if the ground beneath him shifted. He covered his mouth with his hand, his shoulders trembling. "All these years, I grieved you, Rebecca. I cursed myself for not being there that night." Rebecca stepped closer, reaching out as though to touch him, then stopped short. "I wanted to come back, Daniel, but Marlene warned me. If I showed myself, you would both become targets. I stayed hidden, following whispers, watching from the edges. And now it's too late to keep silent." The river glistened in cruel sunlight, and Thomas's mind reeled. The phone calls, the messages, the whispers of unfinished business. They all carried Rebecca's voice. She had been reaching out across the ocean, trying to draw him here. "It was you," Thomas said, his throat tight. "You called me. You told me not to trust anyone." "Why me?" Rebecca's eyes met his, steady and unflinching. "Because you saw them that night. You and Daniel both. Elias believed you were witnesses for a reason, though he never lived to explain it. The ledger holds the truth about the Carters. Their land thefts, their killings, their secrets buried in shallow graves. And now Samuel fears you'll find it. That's why he's watching. That's why he sent his men." The sound of an engine rumbled faintly in the distance. Thomas turned his head sharply, scanning the tree line. Dust rose beyond the bend of the road. Another vehicle was coming. Rebecca's urgency sharpened. "There isn't much time. The ledger isn't far from here. Elias told me before he died. He hid it where the river bends near the cotton mill ruins. We have to move now." Daniel's grief shifted to resolve. He nodded, his jaw tight, his hand reaching instinctively for the duffel bag in the truck. Inside it lay the old letters, the maps, the traces of Elias's desperate warnings. They climbed back into the truck. Rebecca slid into the back seat, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Thomas could feel her tension, the way her fingers drummed against her thigh, the way her gaze lingered on every shadow. The road narrowed as they drove along the river. Tall grass brushed against the sides of the truck, and dragonflies darted above the water. The ruins of the old cotton mill came into view. Brick walls crumbling, windows shattered, ivy crawling over stone like green veins. They parked behind a collapsed wall, the truck hidden from the road. The hum of the approaching vehicle grew louder, then faded again, passing by without slowing. Still, none of them exhaled relief. Rebecca led them through the ruins. Elias believed history leaves marks. He said the ledger would be safe where old voices still whisper. Thomas's boots crunched on gravel as they followed her. The air smelled of dust and riverweed. Inside what had once been the mill's heart, the roof was gone, and sunlight poured through jagged beams. Rebecca stopped near a low stone wall, crouched, and began pulling at loose rocks. Daniel dropped to his knees beside her. His hands joined hers, scraping, lifting, until at last a small wooden chest emerged, its edges blackened with age, its lock rusted. They stared at it in silence. Thomas felt the weight of the moment pressed down on him. His pulse pounded in his ears. This box, this simple, fragile box, held the answers that had chased him across an ocean. Rebecca whispered, "Open it." Daniel broke the lock with a stone. The lid creaked open. Inside lay bundles of papers, some yellowed with time, others stained with water. Names were scrawled in neat handwriting, dates stretching back decades. Land deeds, financial ledgers, lists of payments. And tucked among them, photographs. Men with rifles, men shaking hands under the cover of night. Faces familiar from long-buried memories. Thomas lifted one photograph, his breath catching. It was the scarred man, the one from the bar, standing beside Samuel Carter. On the back of the photo was a single word written in Elias's hand: evidence. Rebecca's voice was barely more than a breath. "With this, we can expose them. We can end it." The sound of footsteps echoed through the ruins. Slow, deliberate, drawing closer. Daniel's head snapped up. He shoved the papers back into the chest, closing it tight. Shadows moved at the edge of the broken wall. A man stepped into the sunlight. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his hair silver at the temples. His eyes were sharp, cold, filled with authority that needed no words. "Samuel Carter," Rebecca whispered. The man smiled faintly, though it never reached his eyes. "I see the past has a way of clawing back to life. Rebecca, my dear, I thought we'd buried you properly. And Thomas, the boy from London, what a surprise." His gaze lingered on Daniel, the smile fading. "You should have stayed in your grief. It suited you better." Behind him, two men emerged, both carrying rifles. The sound of metal against wood filled the ruins as they leveled their weapons. Samuel's voice was calm, almost courteous. "The ledger belongs to me. Hand it over, and I'll let you walk away. Refuse, and this place will become your grave, just as it became Elias's." The cicadas had gone silent. The river seemed to still. Thomas's hands tightened on the chest, his heart hammering. He could feel the choice pressing down on him. A choice that carried years of unfinished business, loss, and truth too long silenced. Rebecca's hand closed over his. Her voice trembled, but it was steady with resolve. "Don't give it to him. Not now. Not ever." The ruins seemed to breathe with tension. The rifles gleamed in the sunlight. Samuel Carter took one step closer, his eyes never leaving theirs. And in that breathless moment, Thomas understood. The phone call had never been a warning alone. It had been a summons, a call into the heart of something ancient, dangerous, and unrelenting. And now, standing face to face with the man whose shadow stretched across all their lives, the true cost of answering that call was about to unfold. The rain had not stopped since that first call, as though the sky itself had chosen to mirror Emma's unease. Each evening she found herself staring at her phone, waiting, dreading, and somehow needing the vibration that told her Daniel was on the other end of the line. His words had been circling in her mind ever since. Sarah, 1996, Austin. The more she tried to dismiss them, the more her memories began to flicker with fragments she couldn't place. One Tuesday night, after another long day at the office, she made herself a cup of strong coffee instead of her usual tea. She sat in the half-darkness of her flat, the rain hammering against the glass, and finally dialed back the strange number. It rang twice before Daniel answered. "Emma," he said, almost in relief. "I wasn't sure if you'd call." "I shouldn't have," she replied, her voice sharper than she intended. But I can't stop thinking about what you said. It doesn't make sense. You're talking about a girl who disappeared in Texas when I was a child in England. How could I possibly be connected? Daniel hesitated before answering. Because there's a photograph. Emma's heart thudded painfully. What photograph? One my mother kept, he said. It was taken at Barton Springs in Austin, the summer before Sarah disappeared. You're in it. Or at least someone who looks exactly like you. Emma blinked, her mind struggling to grasp the words. She had never been to Texas, never been photographed there. That's impossible, she whispered. I thought so too, Daniel admitted. But when I found your name, when I traced it, Emma, you're not just similar. It is you. She wanted to laugh it off, to call him delusional, but her throat tightened instead. Send me the photograph, she demanded. I can, Daniel said, but it would be better if you saw it in person. There are things I can't explain over the phone. Will you meet me? Emma stared at the dark window where raindrops streaked down like tears. You're in Texas, she reminded him. I'm not, he replied. Not anymore. I'm in London. The silence that followed was louder than any thunder outside. Emma could hear her own breathing, shallow and quick. London? She repeated. Yes. I arrived 2 days ago. I had to follow this lead. You're the only person who can help me. Emma closed her eyes, rubbing her forehead. This had gone far beyond coincidence. Either she was dealing with someone deeply troubled, or there was something in her past she had never been told. They agreed to meet 2 nights later at a small cafe near Paddington Station. Emma barely slept in the days leading up to it, her mind whirling with questions she couldn't answer. When Thursday finally came, she took the train to London after work, her stomach churning with a mixture of dread and curiosity. The cafe was dimly lit, with the faint aroma of roasted beans and rain-damp coats lingering in the air. She spotted him instantly, a tall man in his late 30s, wearing a worn leather jacket and holding a folder in his hands like it was too precious to set down. Emma? He asked as she approached. She nodded and sat across from him. His face looked weary, eyes shadowed with sleepless nights, but there was a gentleness to his expression that put her slightly at ease. Daniel slid the folder across the table. See for yourself. With trembling fingers, Emma opened it. Inside was an old photograph, edges yellowed with age. It showed 2 children standing near a pool of water. One was a girl with long dark hair and a bright smile. Sarah, she assumed. The other child, Emma's breath caught. The other was a little girl who looked exactly like her. Same pale hair, same wide eyes. Even the small birthmark on her wrist was visible. Her throat went dry. This can't be me. I've never been there. Daniel leaned forward, his voice low. Then how do you explain it? Emma stared at the photograph until her vision blurred. She could hear the clinking of cups around them, the murmur of other customers, but everything felt distant, muffled. I need answers, she whispered. That makes 2 of us, Daniel replied, because Sarah vanished 2 weeks after this was taken, and no one could ever explain who the other girl in the picture was. Emma's hands shook as she placed the photo back in the folder. What do you expect me to do? I don't know yet, Daniel admitted, but maybe your family does. Did your parents ever mention traveling to America when you were young? Emma shook her head. No, my father died when I was 10. My mother, she never took me abroad. At least not that I remember. Then maybe there are things you were never told, Daniel said softly. Things buried, just like this photograph. That night, Emma returned to Bristol with the image seared into her mind. She lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, wondering what truth her family might have hidden. The next morning, she called her mother. "Hello, darling." Her mother's cheerful voice rang out. "Mom," Emma said carefully, "I need to ask you something important. Did we ever go to America when I was little?" There was a pause. Too long a pause. Then her mother's voice came, quieter now. "Why would you ask something like that?" "Because someone showed me a photograph," Emma pressed. "A photograph of me in Texas." The silence on the other end stretched painfully. Finally, her mother spoke again, her tone unsteady. "Emma, there are things I never told you." Her hands went cold around the phone. She sat down slowly on the edge of her bed. "What things?" Her mother sighed. And when she spoke again, her words carried the weight of years gone by. "When you were 8, we did go to America. Just for one summer. You were very young, and you fell ill when we came back. The doctor said you had some kind of fever, and after that, you didn't remember much of the trip. I thought it best not to remind you. I didn't want to confuse you." Emma's breath came fast. "So I was there, in Texas, with Sarah." Her mother was silent again. "Mom," Emma demanded, her voice rising, "what do you know about Sarah Hayes?" Her mother finally whispered. "I was afraid this day would come. Emma, Sarah was the daughter of a woman I knew, someone I had promised to help. And then she disappeared." Emma's world tilted. She gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles whitened. "You knew her mother? You knew Sarah?" "Yes," her mother admitted. "But there's more, much more, and it's something I never wanted you to carry." Emma felt her heart pounding, her mind reeling with too many questions. Outside, the morning sky was heavy with clouds, as though it might rain again. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling, "tell me everything. Now." Emma's mother spoke for a long time that night. The words tumbled out in fragments, broken by sighs, pauses, and memories that had clearly been buried for decades. She admitted that she had once been close friends with a woman in Texas named Margaret Hayes, Sarah's mother. During the summer of 1996, Emma and her mother had visited Austin, staying in Margaret's home. Sarah and Emma had played together almost every day like sisters. Then came the day Sarah vanished. Emma was with her that afternoon, though too young to truly understand what she had witnessed. Her mother had found her wandering near Barton Springs, confused, clutching Sarah's doll. Whatever Emma had seen, the fever that followed wiped it from her memory. Out of fear, guilt, and the need to protect her daughter, her mother never spoke of that summer again. Hearing it all left Emma shaken. The photograph no longer seemed impossible. It was a mirror of a forgotten truth. She had been there. She had known Sarah, and she had been the last person to see her alive. When Emma met Daniel again, she handed him the story as her mother had told it. His face was pale, his eyes full of both pain and relief. "So it's true," he whispered. "You were there. You might have been the last link to her." Emma nodded slowly, her hands trembling around her coffee cup. "I don't remember enough to help you find her, but maybe together we can piece it back." Daniel looked at her with something like gratitude, though shadows lingered in his expression. "I've searched for so long. Maybe now, with you, I'll finally learn what happened to Sarah." The rain had stopped outside, and the streets glistened under the glow of the lamps. Yet for Emma, the night fell far from over. The past had caught her, and with it came a truth she could no longer ignore. She had answered a call from a number she did not know, and now she was bound to a story that had waited more than 2 decades to be told. The phone had rung once in Texas, but its echo had reached her life in England, and nothing would ever be the same again.